All right, let's hit the ice, everyone, and take a deep dive into the world of curling. You sent in some articles and notes, and you're curious to learn about curling. I get it. You want to go past that stones and sweeping image, right?
Yeah, it's more than just that.
So today, we're going to try to unravel this whole chess on ice thing and see what makes curling so fascinating.
I think the chess on ice comparison does grab people's attention, but you're right, there's a lot of strategy and skill in curling that people don't always see.
Exactly. To really get it, I think
Yeah.
we should start at the beginning. What I'm getting from these articles is that curling has been around for a long time. It goes way back to 16th century Scotland. It's not something that was just invented recently, is it?
No, no, not at all. Think about those frozen lochs, those beautiful Scottish lakes during the harsh winters. Curling was a way for people to come together, enjoy the outdoors, and, well, get a little competitive.
So it was more than just a sport then. It was like a social event, a way to connect during those long winters.
Absolutely. And the equipment was a lot simpler back then. They used those smooth river stones, which are quite different from the really engineered stones they use now. But that core idea stayed the same. You slide the stone toward the target. And that brings us to the house, the scoring area.
Right, the house. I'm picturing it kind of like a bullseye on the ice, but I'm guessing it's more complicated than that.
It's a good way to visualize it, but there's definitely more to it than that. The house is actually made up of a bunch of circles, like rings, inside each other. The closer you get your stone to that center, the more points you score. But here's what's interesting. Each team gets to throw a bunch of stones, so it's not just about hitting the bullseye. It's about putting your stones in a strategic spot to block your opponent, or even to knock their stones out of the house completely.
Ah, I see. So it becomes like a game of chess, like each move can affect the whole game.
Exactly. And that's where the real strategy comes in. You got to think ahead, like what your opponent's going to do. And you have to adjust your own strategy based on what's happening on the ice because it's always changing.
And then there's the sweeping. It always looks so frantic when I see it on TV.
Mm.
It's got to be more than just cleaning the ice,
Oh,
right?
yeah, way more. Sweeping is a really important part of the game. It's all about friction. When players sweep the ice in front of a stone that's moving, they can control its speed and the way it curves. It's how they make it go towards the target or adjust the speed so it lands in the perfect spot.
So they're using physics to their advantage. It must take a ton of skill and coordination to sweep the right way.
Absolutely. And there's a lot of specific terms they use for sweeping. You have intern sweeping, which makes the stone curves more. And then there's outturn sweeping, which does the opposite. It makes it curve less. And the sweepers, they have to judge how hard the stone was thrown to figure out how much sweeping they need to do. It's a real art form.
Okay, now I'm really starting to see why they call curling chess on ice. There's so much strategy and precision involved. But I'm curious, with all this talk about strategy and skill, who's the one making the decisions? Who's coming up with these strategic moves?
That would be the skip. The skip is like the captain of the team. They stand at the other end of the ice, in the house, and direct the play. The skip, they decide the strategy, call the shots. They tell the other players where to aim and how much to sweep.
So they're like a chess grandmaster and a quarterback all rolled into one, leading the team to victory.
Exactly. That's a great analogy. The skip has to really understand the game, be able to read the ice conditions, and communicate really well with their team. It's a real leadership role that needs tactical skills and people skills.
This is so much more interesting than I thought it would be. But now I'm curious about the big leagues. Where can you see curling at its most competitive level?
Well, the biggest event has got to be the Winter Olympics, of course. It's all there. The tension, the drama, the national pride. Then there's the World Curling Championships, where you have men's, women's, and mixed doubles teams competing to be the best in the world.
I bet those tournaments are incredibly intense with everyone playing their absolute best.
Absolutely. The level of skill you see there is unbelievable. And beyond those big events, there's also the Grand Slam of curling. It's a series of competitions with the top teams from around the world, kind of like the Grand Slams in tennis, but with stones and brooms instead.
Wow. So there's like a whole hierarchy of competitive curling from local clubs all the way up to the Olympics. That's pretty impressive.
It is, and it shows how popular curling is around the world. But what's even more impressive is how much strategy is involved. I know we talked about the chess on ice analogy, but there are other comparisons too. In some ways, curling is like pool or butch.
Oh, interesting. I wouldn't have thought of that. How are those games like curling? Okay, I'm ready to hear about these pool and bocce connections. I'll admit I haven't played bocce in a while, but
Okay.
yeah, I can see where the strategy comes in.
Well, with pool, it's all about the angles and hitting the ball just right, just like when you line up a shot on a pool table. Curlers have to think about how their stone's going to hit the other stones, how it'll bounce off the boards, and how much force to use to get it where they want it to go.
So it's not just about like throwing it really hard. You need finesse and an understanding of how the game works, the physics of it.
Exactly. And just like in pool, if you mess up your calculation even a little bit, the balls can go all over the place in directions you didn't want them to go. In curling, if you don't put a stone in the right place, it can mess up your whole plan.
What about botch? The main thing I remember about botch is you want to get your ball closest to the target. How does that connect to curling?
It's similar. Both games are about being strategic about where you put your ball or stone, blocking your opponent, and thinking ahead. You have to guess where your opponent might throw their ball or stone, and then place your own in a way that gives you an advantage. It's that, like, spatial awareness and tactical thinking that links them.
So even though they use different equipment and play on different surfaces, the basic strategy is the same. You want to get your object closer to the target than your opponent and outsmart them.
You got it. And that's what makes curling so cool. It has things in common with all these other strategy games, but it's still totally unique.
That brings me to what makes curling different from all those other games. We talked about strategy and skill, but what really sets it apart?
One thing that jumps out at me is how important the team is. Unlike chess or pool, where you're usually playing by yourself, curling is all about the team. You can't win alone. It takes communication, working together, and doing things at the same time.
It's like a dance, everyone moving in sync towards the same goal.
I like that. The person throwing the stone needs the sweepers to adjust the stone's path. The sweepers need the thrower to throw the stone with the right force and spin. And the skip is overseeing everything, making the strategy decisions and guiding the team. That synergy is what makes it so fun to watch.
And I bet that level of teamwork creates a real sense of friendship between the players.
Oh, absolutely. Curling teams, they build a strong sense of trust and respect for each other. They win together, lose together, and celebrate together. It's a very social sport, both on and off the ice.
So we have the mental strategy, the teamwork. What else makes curling unique?
Well, unlike games like chess or pool that are played in controlled environments, curling throws in some unpredictability. It's not just about doing calculations in your head, it's about adapting to things in the real world that you can't always control.
You mean like the ice?
Exactly. The ice can change during a game, and that affects how the stones move. You need a good eye to see those little changes in the ice. That's really important for making strategic decisions. You might have the perfect shot planned out, but if you don't think about how the ice is curling, your stone could end up way off.
So the ice is like another player in the game.
That's a great way to put it. And then there's the physical side of curling. It may not look as intense as some other sports, but curling needs strength, stamina, and balance. Think about sliding a 42-pound stone across the ice and keeping perfect form. It's harder than it looks.
And don't forget the sweeping. That takes a lot of energy and precision.
Oh, yeah. There's actually a lot of athleticism involved in sweeping. It's not just about brushing the ice really hard, it's about finesse and control. Sweepers have to know how much pressure to use, when to sweep, and when to hold back.
So curling's not just a strategy game, it's also a test of your physical and mental strength. Like a mix of chess, dance, and weightlifting, all happening on the ice.
It's a really interesting combination for sure. But there's one more thing about curling that I really admire, and that's how accessible and inclusive it is.
Accessibility and inclusivity. Those are things I haven't thought about too much.
It's something that people often miss. Curling is a sport that really welcomes people of all ages and abilities.
So you're saying, like, even if I've never been on the ice before, I could still try curling.
Exactly. You can find curling clubs pretty much everywhere, and they're really welcoming to new people. They'll give you all the equipment, teach you the basics, and you can learn at your own speed.
And I've heard there are even ways for people with disabilities to play.
You're right, curling is great for that. There are programs for people who use wheelchairs, people who are visually impaired, and people with other physical challenges. It's amazing to see how they can change the sport so that anyone can play and experience the fun of sliding stones and sweeping the ice.
That's awesome. It shows how welcoming and inclusive the curling community is.
Definitely. It's one of the most supportive and social sports communities I know. There's a real sense of camaraderie among curlers, no matter how good you are or where you come from.
This has been such an eye-opening deep dive. I feel like I've gone from knowing almost nothing about curling to really appreciating how deep and complex it is.
And we've only just scratched the surface. There's so much more to discover about this sport. the different strategies, the way the ice conditions affect the game, the history, the famous players. It's something you can keep learning about your whole life.
You've definitely made me curious. I might have to look for a local curling club and give it a try.
I highly recommend it. You might find out that you love it.
For our listener who's been learning about curling with us today, what's the biggest takeaway? What should they remember as they keep exploring this sport?
I'd say don't be scared of the strategy or all the technical terms. Curling might look simple at first glance, but like we've been talking about, there's a whole world of strategy, teamwork, and skill going on beneath the
It's
surface.
like that iceberg thing, you know? You only see the tip, but there's a whole lot more underneath.
Precisely. And that's where the real beauty of curling is. So, to our listener, I encourage you to take on the challenge, find a local curling club, and try it out for yourself.
And who knows, maybe we'll see you on the ice someday, sweeping your way to victory. That's all for our deep dive into the world of curling. We hope you had a blast sliding along with us.